Yes, I'm a journalist. Sorry. Been writing about business and management for 20 odd years for very respectable publications, usually. And so I've been thinking about work and management and organisations, leadership for a very long time. I find it fascinating. It's one of the reasons I want to know Henry, one of the reasons I wanted to come see you today, because I just like talking about it, really. The first job I had, there was a poster up in the mailroom, and on it were the words, "Floggings will continue until morale improves." Now, it was a magazine, a journalistic company, and the media, papers, mags, can be pretty rough places to work. They're very transactional workplaces. There's space to fill, which you've got to fill, and with a deadline to fill it by. Or if you're talking about broadcasting, silence to fill, or blank screens to fill. So it's a very transactional sort of trade. It is a trade, it's not a profession, it is a trade. And so I've got my bias, which if you hadn't guessed, I should be obvious about that. My work experience, such as it is very often been in workplaces that are probably not always terribly happy, although there's a sort of solidarity in the toughness sometimes, and people survive and become quite hardened to it. But they're often you might say very old-fashioned workplaces. They are what you would call command and control workplaces, because there's got to be an editor or a boss, hard deadlines, transactional work, which is either sort of done or not, and if it's not done, you're probably in trouble. So it's quite a sort of basic kind of workplace, as that poster implied, which possibly has something to do with some of the attitudes of the media, of journalists that you find. And one of the reasons why the portrayal of workplaces and businesses can be quite tough. As you know, journalists have a preference for bad news rather than good news. Good news is no news, as we tend to say. We don't really see that as our job. That's for the PR industry. To a journalist, news is when something's happened. Could be a good thing, but probably, preferably, it's something we need to worry about. A big event. The absence of earthquakes isn't news. A big terrible earthquake is news. Also, usually, the nearer to home, the more we think it's new. This is perhaps a British attitude. And the more it's affecting people like us, the more we think it's news as well. So anyway, these are all the biases that affect me and also affect the coverage and the discussion of work in workplaces. I suppose that poster is a kind of crude, rough summary of what's sometimes called Theory X management. I'm sure many of you have heard about Theory X and Theory Y from Doug McGregor, a book which is over 50 years old called The Human Side of Enterprise. And let me crudely summarise. Theory X is this sort of transactional, rather low trust environment. People being heavily supervised, very transactional work, minimal autonomy or zero autonomy in the worst cases for some people. Theory Y, on the other hand, is much more what you're talking about here, and what's in Henry's very good list, his manifesto at the front that you've probably been talking about this morning or today. Higher trust, empowerment, absence of supervision as far as possible, allowing people to get on with things. Probably, we hope, a much happier sort of workplace. Now there's this constant tension. This is the tension that in a way I've been sort of wrestling with for over 20 years when I write about work and management, because there is this sort of default Theory X thinking in some organisations, in some managers, that Theory Y, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating things we've already discussed, but Theory Y is a sort of, in quotation marks, is soft. It's soft stuff, it's sound soft. This stuff about happiness. And there is this default setting of command and control, and it's incredibly, I do feel like the grumpy guest at a happy party, but it's the sort of, it's the default mode of quite a lot of bosses and quite a lot of organisations. So I've been asked to pose a couple of questions to you in the course of these few minutes. And something just for you to think about, because it's something I think about, and it's really why I got into this trade and this subject. Just to think about the worst boss you ever had, and also the best boss you ever had. Maybe they fit that sort of theory X. I mustn't presume too much or prejudice the answers, but maybe they do fit that sort of theory X, theory Y, but maybe not. I don't want to be unfair to theory X. There are certain contexts, certain workplaces where theory X actually might be not such a stupid way of doing things. But just think about the best boss and the worst boss. As they say, people will forget what you say, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And the bad boss experience, the unhappy workplace, you know, we're talking about some of those emotional things. But the other big question I want to raise this afternoon with you is why not? Why don't we see more happy work? Why don't we have more of this? Why don't we open the doors of offices and get hit by a wave of joy and productivity and energy? Because this is a serious business point. Again, the counter to this point about softness is that it's the opposite of soft. It's about business results or better service. The point 2 on this list in the manifesto is particularly important in the manifesto. Make your people feel good. Now, again, to a Theory X boss, to a Theory X organisation, that sounds ridiculous. It sounds absurd. It sounds soft. It sounds feeble. It sounds sort of charitable. It doesn't sound businesslike. But you've got lots of evidence to support you, and there's some in this book, and you'll be hearing some today, that making your people feel good is actually a very sensible thing to do from a business point of view. There's an Indian businessman, Vinay Nair, who was until recently running a company called HCL Technologies, a big software and outsourcing company in India. He wrote his own book about this subject, and he calls it the people-first approach to management. He says that the job of the manager, fundamentally, is to make sure, yes, that your people feel good. And why? Well, he raises this very simple, very neat, and very business-like point, which is why it's a nice bit of evidence. He says, where is value? Where is value actually created? You know, where sales are happening, where transactions take place, where a good service is being provided, where is value actually created for you as a business or a non-profit organisation? It's in that moment where the employee is dealing with a customer or the person who is receiving a service. It's in that moment, it's in that interaction, that relationship. Therefore, Nair says, the job of the manager is to do everything he or she can to make sure that that employee, in that moment, with the customer, can perform as well as possible, can do as well as possible. Feels good about their work. Feels happy about it. I really like that argument because it's sort of logical, and it's effectively using the language of business, in particular the language of business people who might be sceptical about the whole notion of happiness, to make a point. But why don't we see more? Well, I've got a few thoughts in my head. Please shout yours out. As organisations get bigger, hierarchy inevitably asserts itself. The career path, the career ladder. Now, it's been quite trendy to talk about very flat organisations and the absence of hierarchy. It seems to me hierarchy clings on, quite resilient, even when apparently there isn't one. There quite possibly is one. You don't necessarily need job titles to see the effects of power and power relationships. There was a professor at London Business School, John Hunt, who used to say, when one person meets another, a hierarchy is immediately formed. So like, whether we like it or not, whether we try to drive these things out or not, these things can happen. And then, of course, again, as organisations get bigger, the hierarchy asserts itself, bureaucracy asserts itself, and politics, inevitably, enter too. And we're dealing with human beings, not saints. Human beings are under pressure. If you're in a public company that has to report its results every 3 months, there's pressure there to tell investors the right thing, to keep journalists and analysts happy. If you've got your own personal lives and pressures at home, commercial, financial needs to maintain a career, to say the right thing, to not say the wrong thing at work. I'm obviously talking about environments that have failed to create the sort of openness, transparency, honesty that you're talking about today, but we can't deny, unfortunately, that this is not everywhere. It's not everywhere. Has anyone got a best boss, bad boss vignette they can share that might be helpful in this context? I'm always interested in these. And I'm not only asking for bad news, I'm happy to accept good news. Yes?
The worst boss I ever had was somebody that didn't have trust in any of us, but not because...
Sorry, I've done the wrong thing. Yeah.
But not because he didn't trust us because he cared so much about the job. It's literally because he just didn't care enough about the job. He was just like, I don't care.
Yes.
I think he hated his job and actually probably hated his wife. And that came across in just a do whatever you want. And it was a horrible place to work.
And what did you do about it? Did you just leave?
I left.
Yes. Well, that, of course, that was. But again, there you have the business. People always tell us to provide a business case for these things, a bottom line argument. That silly company lost you, which was clearly a mistake. They've probably gone bust. They have. The talent and the creativity and the good people leave if they can, and they will.
Yeah.
And it's give us some good news to balance it. Or if you've never had a good boss.
I have one now.
Ah.
I'm very good boss.
And she's
now.
sitting
I'm
next
very
to you.
happy.
Oh, yeah. What's good about your current good boss?
She is like so encouraging. Like she would never stand in the way of you getting a promotion. In fact, she would encourage you to get a promotion.
Even if it took you out of her team?
Ultimately, yes. I think she'd be sad to lose people in her team, but she would actually take happiness in seeing you develop, and I wholeheartedly believe she would.
Yes. So you've had a bit of a theory X, theory Y experience in a way. Wonderful, is that there? Are there any other good ones to hear from? Was there a hand over here? Yeah.
Hang on.
Okay. Oh, well. Good assist.
My first ever boss, I was telling this story outside, used to scare the living daylights out of me. Her normal pitch was shouting, and everyone in the company was incredibly scared of her. She's very small, really good. But the really interesting thing I think about it, I left, but there was a core of people who stayed and were very loyal for, in some cases, 10, 20 years.
Yes.
And there was a group, and they just get together and moan about her and tut about her, but for some reason never left. And I couldn't quite understand that. But I think it was this sort of, this sort of being in a shell hole together. Yeah.
And is there a good story as well? I must balance it.
Yeah, you're just a really inspiring boss who let you do, who was very encouraging.
Your current one or the recent?
No, but yeah.
But it's very interesting, that sort of resignation of people. I mean, figurative resignation, not actual resignation. People stay, in other words, and go, oh, this is just it. And yes, you could talk about Stockholm Syndrome, or you could talk about just inertia.
It's how those ex-companies continue. That's what I thought your question about how do they survive was interesting, and I could see it in that organisation. They survived because they had a core of people who liked being beaten up.
Or we have a almost masochistic, some of us, notion about work, unfortunately. But what else are we facing in this country? We're facing this terrible productivity crisis. We have, luckily, not as high unemployment as some countries, but we seem to have a lot of people, millions of people, turning up for work either part or full time and being not very productive at all. And this has implications for the famous deficit because people don't earn enough, so they don't pay enough in tax. And there's a risk that although the economy is recovering from a deep, deep ditch, so the numbers have got a bit better in terms of growth, there's a chance that we'll be stuck because we're going to underperform. We're going to be below our productive capacity, productive potential forever because not enough workplaces are going to be happy and they're not going to be productive, high energy enough. So again, it's a hard economic question. The problem I've had all through my journalistic career is trying to get very serious people who worry about GDP and macroeconomic data and graphs and charts that do this, that in the end we're talking about people, even in an age of machines. Of course new technology is doing all sorts of wonderful things, so of course jobs are changing, and of course we worry about robots replacing us. But actually, we still need people. We still need that essential human interaction much of the time. Indeed, companies that do well often, to generalise enormously, they're often retaining a human element where others are outsourcing us to automated phone systems or whatever it is and losing out because of that. So this couldn't be more urgent, really. It couldn't be more important. And again, it's not just a nice thing, happy companies. It's a very hard-headed thing. It's a very business-like thing. Yeah. Oh, shall I throw this thing out? No. Yeah.
I guess it could be controversial after last week as well. But are we managed in a Generation X, Generation Y level nationally? What's the flavour of the culture?
I mean, Theory X, Theory Y.
Theory Y, yeah, Theory X, Theory Y.
Well, I like to generalise. Journalists always generalise. And the former editor of The Economist said that the job of the journalist is first to simplify and then exaggerate.
Very good.
So let me talk about the whole nation in one go. There's clearly a risk of that. I mean, there's clearly a risk that we have this low expectations, resignation, miserabilism about what. I mean, what was that popular sitcom, The Office, was not about a very happy, high energy, productive, collaborative, joyous workplace being led by an empowering, enlightened, stimulating and inspiring leader. Now, maybe what I described wouldn't make for a very good sitcom or a drama even.
Or very good news. I mean,
good news.
Yeah.
It's related to the discussion about employee engagement. Now, some of you will know the David McLeod and Nita Clark report on engagement. They've done some terrific work. They've found lots of good examples. But if you ask David McLeod about it, I think he would say he does just come up against a brick wall on some occasions with some organisations, with some employers, because they don't quite get the argument. And in a way, some Theory X organisations, Theory X bosses are sort of stuck in that attitude. As I say, it can be sustainable. In my trade, it certainly can be. Some of these TV companies, newspapers, whatever, can be pretty rough places to work, but they're surviving-ish, some of them. And if you went to the editor and said, I've just been to this marvellous conference about how, look, we're going to be much happier. I want you to love work and celebrate mistakes. Boss, it's not, there are some places where that's not going to necessarily work straight away. Yep.
I'll throw it.
No.
I feel sorry about that.
And I think all this focus of economy and politics in general about increasing GDP and increasing the added value for the shareholders lead us, all these companies, consultants, employees, managers, trying to produce more and more and more each day. So I think that's one of the main
Yeah.
reasons why we can have a happy workplace.
Yeah.
So it's like I think meanwhile we need to change the way we think about
Yes.
running the world. But
Yes. Well,
that-
I think that's a very
Yeah.
interesting comment, and we need another conference and another
Yeah.
day. But it's,
Yeah.
I mean, who was it who said we should try to be more, not have more? You know, I mean, there is.
I mean, United Nations said we have to increase the gross national happiness rather than.
There's clearly, you know, there's only one planet.
Yeah.
There's only one amount of stuff here. Of course, people get clever and clever with resources. We hope, or we'll have to. But you know, there's going to be 9 billion people. You're right. I mean,
Consuming
longer
more and
term,
more all the time.
Yes. It sounds like we're maybe stuck in a system that actually will
Kill itself.
eat itself up, potentially. No, I completely agree with that. But again, that's a longer term consideration, whereas in the short to medium term,
But
here and now.
when will we start thinking about that?
well, you've started. Yeah.
Osho's quote, I like it very much. There's no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And theory X and Y, I differentiate between doing a job or playing while doing a job.
Yes.
And the interviews and the sessions that I had with software programmers was very striking that they're playing while programming. And how do you get into that state of flow, I ask? I don't need to do anything. It just, the program asks me a question and I get in.
Yes.
So they see it as a game. Now,
Yes.
the whole problem is with the more oppressive or more autocratic leader or the worst boss or the best boss is one does what needs to be done, very transactional, and is it done? Checklist. But the other one does it with willingness, with authenticity,
Yes.
with getting into it and enjoying it.
With
At the end,
discretionary efforts, as we say in HR. Yes.
discretionary effort and not with the aim of reaching the results, but enjoying while going through. So that's the
Yes.
happiness is the way.
Less teleological.
I don't know what that is.
Nor do I. Just said it. I hope I didn't ignore it. No, it means aiming for a goal. Aiming for a specific goal.
yes. At the eventually
Yeah.
they hit the goal.
Yes. But not not in a straight line, and they don't start out going, right, I'm going there. They just say, I'm going.
Yeah.
And yeah. All right, let me take that.
You've obviously had the pleasure for the last 20 years of working in journalism and writing about management and seeing best practice and worst practice.
Yes.
So what have you done in your last 20 years to stop the public floggings and increase morale?
Well, I've tried to find some better examples, and I've tried to write about them. I've tried to be critical about things that I don't think are working. And then you hope that editors will publish what you come up with. But, you know, even that can be difficult because we talk about a free press, but not every story finds a home.
And, you know, you say inside your trade, how's that accepted by the non-management, non-business side of the writers, the editors, etc.? Is that something that's accepted, or do you see yourself in a Theory X trade and they're going to stay that way?
Well, I'm afraid I think the answer is the latter. And actually, it's a bit more interesting than that, though. There are very few journalists who actually specialise in management and work. When trade unions were much bigger, we had a lot more industrial, what they're called industrial or labour correspondents. There used to be loads of them. But they're now hardly, there's virtually none left on newspapers whatsoever. Really none. And the only way you get these stories is if people go on strike, which is a problem for the unions because that's the only way they seem to get attention is by going on strike. They very rarely get to talk about, you know, learning at work or problem solving or anything like that. It's, you know, so Network Rail might be on strike as a story, so we hear about the unions in that context. No, it's it's difficult, but other journalists themselves are not necessarily terribly interested. There's a narrow field, which is good in a way, there's less competition, but the reason is that they're in this trade, as you've said, that actually doesn't necessarily relate to some of these questions terribly well, because just do it, you know, that's the world we're in. And, well, you can reflect on the way journalists cover other stories, about, you know, the mentality that's formed in the trade, but how it becomes a sort of a mechanism for passing these stories on. I don't know how we're doing for... Oh, there's one more here. Yeah. Good catch.
So my question is just really if you've got an idea why, with all the body of evidence and the financial data and everything that says, and all of us know, why you should create a happy workplace.
Yes.
Why this is still a conference of this size and not of 10,000, and why, you know, people like John Lewis, who consistently have done amazingly and talked beautifully earlier today. Why?
It's a very good question.
Could you talk to that?
Yes, I'll try to. I'll try and fail. I don't know if competition in sectors and in markets makes people nervous and worried that being, you know, more open, we could even say kinder. I mean, maybe this is a sort of Anglo-Saxon thing to say. Not that I am really Anglo-Saxon, but anyway. When worried that it betrays a kind of weakness. We have this myth that competition is a sort of win-lose, rather aggressive, fierce thing that requires toughness, whatever that, you know, or a notion of toughness. And certainly public companies, quoted companies that are on the stock market, do have to have apparently a good story to tell investors every 3 or 6 months minimum, which is something John Lewis don't have to do, clearly.
But
And which not-for-profits don't have to do.
But
Sorry?
if they did have to, then they would always tell a good story. So.
Yeah, but I think there's a systemic issue or question about companies that have to hit certain quite demanding targets in the short to medium term rather than the much longer term.